Yeah,
Yeah.
took me a long time to make friends with the name,
Oh,
but I
really?
really like it now. You know, when I was
Oh,
a
yeah.
kid, I
Well,
didn't
you know,
care for it.
it's unusual anymore, so it's
Well,
nice.
how about Jane for a vintage day?
Jane, my granddaughter's Jane.
All of a sudden, it's coming back.
Yeah.
I teach
yeah.
the preschoolers at church, and there's 2 little Janes right
Oh,
now.
is there? Yeah, she's 20 now, so, but, yeah. Yeah, it's a nice name.
It's easy to spell.
Yeah. Jane's last name is not easy to spell. It's Swearingen.
Swearington.
Swearingen.
Yeah.
Swearingen.
Yeah.
Well, Lovelady's easier than that.
Love, what is it?
Love Lady.
Love Lady?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a neat name. Talk
There
about
are-
neat names.
Apparently, 2 other Love Ladies,
Oh.
at least that are on Kaiser Permanente's insured road.
Oh,
And
really?
the majority of it's a British name, and it mostly, if you know Love Ladies, they've come somehow from Texas.
From Texas?
Texas, who knows why? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Did you grow up in? You didn't grow up in Texas. You're from the
No,
West,
from the
right?
great
and sovereign state of Kansas.
There we go.
Yeah. Down to 350 people. You don't see very many people who came from a town of 350 people.
No.
My dad was the youngest of 10, and we all lived in the same town. I had 31 first cousins. Talk about extended family.
It sounds like you had to mind your P's and Q's because
Oh, no, it was a very loving, great place to grow up. You could, depending on where you were at breakfast, you could eat with Aunt Fern or Aunt Nell, or you could have lunch with Aunt Bertha. You know, or you from this town to wherever you were, you just told your mother to call, and or the telephone operator knew where you were. Because there was a switchboard operator, and they always knew where people were.
that's awesome.
Yeah, that's how old I am, yeah. That's how old I am. Where'd you grow up?
Just outside of Chicago.
Oh, that's a big city.
So I grew up riding my bike and hearing the crunching of wheels and the tires.
Yeah.
Really loving that. And then when I was a teenager, I was older than I was. So my brother, who was very sweet and humble, used to take me dancing. So we would go out and to blues joints and
And that's where you got to be a blues dancer and musician. What, do you sing?
yeah.
Oh, that's fun. You sing now?
You know, I need to, I don't, I need to go see an ENT. I've been having some, I think my asthma's totally under control.
The pollution now is worse than I can ever remember it. I'm never bothered by it, but that pollen.
Yes.
Unbelievable, isn't it?
It's like a, we went for a walk and I didn't think twice about it. We got home and looked at it and the air was yellow.
It is yellow.
We were walking through a sea of pollen.
Yeah.
So I think that, yeah. But I was actually hoping to come for something.
Well, that'd be fun.
Did you ever get to nurse?
Yeah, I never have done it. Yeah, we do. We are getting closer to the house. And we have some, they're gonna come and walk to make sure that the plat is aligned right now. In the house. I can't think of what's happening. Of course, the accident with Jan is satisfying a little bit, but we're doing it. It's been a serious pain level, but you know what? She's been able to handle all of the mindfulness and
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
That's a little spirited. How are we doing this night?
Well,
Welcome to Respond to Racism, our monthly community meeting. Want to extend my welcome to everyone here as well as watching online. So we have another great presentation tonight with our featured guest, Emilly Prado, who I'll be introducing in just a little bit, but got to do some housekeeping, got some announcements. So first off, the Gloria Brown Memorial Scholarship is still open. It's going to be applications close April 15th, so this is open to BIPOC seniors, not just who go to Lake Oswego School District, but reside in Lake Oswego. You can learn more by going to respondtoracism.org or following the QR code, or scanning and following the QR code on screen. So if you'd like to learn more about that, please go to one of those two places. I can also answer questions after the meeting. And make sure to mark your calendars. Got a number of things going on, including our next community meeting, which is going to feature Melissa Lowry and her award-winning documentary, Black Girl in Suburbia. So that's on May 13th, right here at LOUCC. And the discussion will be streamed as well on youtube.com/@respondtoracismLO. So again, mark your calendars for that. Again, more events coming up. So the Clackamas County Equity Coalition is having its quarterly meeting on April 18th. It'll feature the Oregon Department of Justice answering questions on the DOJ bias hotline. So for some of you, if you came to our county equity forum on March 2nd, may have remembered one of the people in there talking about how for their group in Oregon City, the hotline actually led them back to their own group. So, you know, it's not as straightforward as you can seem, and there's a lot to discuss. So again, you can scan the QR code above. Also register at this link, which is probably going to be hard to follow if you're just in the stands right now, but we'll work on that. And that is Thursday, April 18th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. Also, we'll be tabling, Respond to Racism, that is, we'll be tabling at a couple events. First, coming up on April 20th, there's the LO Sustainability Resource Fair, which will be from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Lake Ridge Middle School. There's going to be a number of groups, including us, come say hi. And later that day, we will also be at Asian Cultural Festival at Lake Oswego High School from 1 to 8 p.m. So again, it's one of the best student events every year. And yeah, just highly encourage you to come through, enjoy some good food, performances, and again, meet a lot of the groups doing great work in the community. Also, I'd like to direct you to a couple new things on our website. First, our leadership and board have worked collaboratively to develop a theory of change, which is a document to really emphasize and explain just what we're about as an organization. So, over the years, been so busy in so many places, sometimes you get different answers depending on who you ask. To that end, we've created a theory of change documenting not just what our vision is for change in the community, but how we plan to get there and a timeline for what that could look like. So highly encourage you again to go to respondtoracism.org, check that out. We're going to be doing some more events, some more programming to engage the community with this. So it's not just a document that lives on the website, but it's something that we are actively and continuously engaging with. Also, we have added a new section to our website, the Community Spotlight section. In particular, we want to highlight work being done by current and former students of color that helps further our mission and further the work we're trying to do and what we want to see in the community. So the first feature in this is first-time author, LOHS graduate member, founding member of the BSU, Daniel Nsengimana, and his debut novel, Children of the Sun. We have a little bit about the book and where you can find it to learn more. Hoping, cross your fingers, when Daniel's back in town, that we can do some events around town. So maybe a reading, maybe a book discussion. So stay tuned for that, but we really want to engage with this work and engage, just provide a platform for the voices who've been at ground zero, especially when it comes to this anti-racism work in Lake Oswego. And again, to emphasize, go to youtube.com/@respondtoracismLO. We have you can see Daniel's interview if you want to learn more about him, But also we have, if you're not able to catch these meetings live, we have videos in our archive. We have a series, Life After the Bubble. Our most recent episode features former student, MC, painter, multidisciplinary artist Anthony Parrish. So highly recommend you watch that. And if you were in the fellowship hall, you may have seen a card that looks like this. We encourage you to support this work, bringing in speakers, trying to build our capacity as an organization costs money, frankly. So we hope you can encourage others to support our work so we can continue to grow what we're doing, both in terms of not just numbers, but capacity, quality, sustainability, really. And finally, if you'd like to stay up to date on everything that's happening, we have a bi-weekly newsletter that comes out on our email, and you just have to go to respondtoracism.org and sign up there. It's just putting your name, your email, and you will be on the list. If you saw the sign-up sheet up front, you could also throw your email there, and we will get you plugged in so you can stay up on everything RtR. Before we get into tonight's presentation, I'd like to highlight special community support that we got from Hacienda CDC to make sure we have a book giveaway tonight with Funeral for Flaca. And quick message, Hacienda CDC, as some of you may know, is working with Mackenzie on a affordable housing unit in Lake Grove. They have an upcoming meeting on April 23rd. So it's a community information session so people can learn more, so people can see how, actually envision what they want for not just affordable housing, but what makes you welcome in the community. What does that look like? And I want to share just a quick note from the people at Hacienda. They wanted to point out that one of their goals for this meeting is that they've heard a lot from the neighborhood associations on the unit, but they want to broaden out the perspectives and really get the community input needed beyond just the neighborhood association. So this is a great opportunity to engage, and they encourage anyone who is, if you're interested in supporting, potentially interested in living in these units, come to this meeting. Again, that is April 23rd from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Lake Oswego Adult Community Center on 505 G Avenue. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker this evening. Emilly Prado is an award-winning author and journalist, educator, and DJ based in Portland, Oregon. She is the author of the essay collection Funeral for Flaca, a winner of the 2022 Pacific Northwest Book Award, a 2021 bronze winner of the Forward Indies Book of the Year Award in essays, and several other honors. Her writing and photographs have appeared in more than 30 publications, including NPR, Bitch Media, and Marie Claire. An alum of the Randolph College MFA, she teaches creative writing at the Pacific Northwest College of Art and moonlights as DJ Mommy Miami with Noche Libre, the Latinx DJ collective she co-founded in 2017. Learn more at www.emilyprado.com or follow her on social media at Emily G. Prado. I'd like to welcome Emily. Please give a round of applause.
Thank you so much. Is this one of my mics on? Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
A little bit,
Well,
get a little closer.
or maybe we'll start with... Oh, okay, great. Okay, if you need it higher, just let us know. Or it's good? Okay, great, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm gonna switch over to my slides, but I'm really excited to be here today. If you need a DJ, let me know. I heard some interest perhaps in the crowd when you heard my DJ name. I'm not from Miami, as you will soon learn, but I feel like it is the ethos of my DJ style to embody Miami, hopefully. But today I'm here to talk about my book. My book is called Funeral for Flaca, and this talk is called Finding My Way to Funeral for Flaca. And I'm going to share a little bit of my writing journey and also just sort of my journey through education and what has brought me to be here in this space today. But I'm really excited to be here. I'm a big fan of Bruce and all of his work, so I've heard so much about this group, and it's really cool to be here finally. So thanks for having me. So before we begin, I like to mention that without my own family, I could not be here today. So this is a photo of my mother holding me, and then my dad holding me, and my oldest sister, Erica. And in this photo, we were in Mexico. We were visiting, but both of my family, on both sides of my family, are from Michoacan, Mexico. And without them immigrating to California, I couldn't be here, and all of my ancestors before them. So I just like to acknowledge them, and my story doesn't begin until their arrival, first and foremost. And so this is a map that shows where my family came from. It is on the coast of Mexico, and my family came, my mother came when she was 2 years old, and my dad came, actually was born in the US, went back to Mexico, and then came back when he was 18. And so I consider myself first and a half generation American because I'm not neatly first generation and not neatly second, so I'm somewhere in between. And that is a commonality of a lot of my experience growing up, of being kind of in these in-between spaces. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area and moved to Portland when I was 18 to go to Portland State University, and I have been here ever since. And I am the second in my family to graduate from high school. My sister Erica, who you saw in the slide earlier, was the first. And I'm also a graduate of Portland State University and a MFA that I completed recently. But before then, I was just a little girl in the Bay Area. So a lot of times when you talk to an author, one of the most common questions I'll receive is, why do you write? And so I've framed today's talk around this question of why I write. So that's me. When I was in 6th grade, and I looked really punk, according to myself at that age. I really, really wanted this red backdrop to be part of my punk era. I was in my punk phase of life, and I thought that it would make me look tough. But on the inside, I was struggling. And even though I'm smiling in this photo, and I have my cool new shirt that I thought was very punk, I had a lot of things going on inside. And so I had loved school up until middle school. Once I got to middle school is when I started to kind of struggle, not only emotionally, but also at school. So I had low grades beginning in 6th grade. In 7th grade, I started to layer that with a lot of detentions. And then by 8th grade, I continued to experience detentions, suspension, and I almost failed 8th grade. And so I had this effect where not only did I not really feel like I was smart at that time or that I was capable, but it felt like my grades and the experience around me was just sort of further evidence that I wasn't smart and that I just wasn't going to do well in school. At home, my parents had split up when I was in middle school, just before middle school. Sorry, elementary school. Time is hard, as I'm sure maybe some of you know. It's hard to pinpoint sometimes, but by the time I was in middle school, even though my parents had been separated for a while, there was just moments where I felt like I would be reminded of the fact that like my peers had their families, their parents, and I didn't. And I struggled with that a lot. And also later, as I would learn, I had undiagnosed at the time and then diagnosed but untreated depression. And so I didn't feel like I was really supported at school. I didn't really feel like I was supported at home. If you had talked to an adult in my life at that point, including my parents, a lot of things that I remember hearing as a kid was that I talked back to adults, which was true. I had a really hard time speaking, so anytime that I felt like I was even remotely in conflict or maybe accused of something, I couldn't talk. My voice would just clench up and I would cry or I would shut down, because if I shut down, at least then I'd keep the emotions contained. but I couldn't often trust myself to even speak or try to explain myself. And so a lot of times I just felt really trapped and interior, right? They'd say that I didn't care, that I was a bully, that I didn't try hard enough, that I was selfish, disrespectful, I had a bad attitude. Really what I was hearing was that I just wasn't good enough. I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't kind enough, I wasn't enough. And that's really the message that I internalized. And while on one end, I think that from the outside, those things were very true for the people perhaps who were interacting with me, what I think could have happened was maybe a peeling back or a zooming out. And I think when we look at this beyond just myself as a kid and the adults in my life, we're looking at not only was I struggling with untreated depression, but I had low self-esteem, and that comes from an individual, but it also comes from our surroundings, right? My family was repeating some cycles of sort of emotional trauma and abuse, and even though they were there very physically, like in providing for us, I grew up in suburbs. I grew up with access to a lot of things, but I didn't grow up with a lot of access to like emotional care or learning how to talk about my feelings. And so as a result now, I have the language to say I really struggled with emotional regulation, with access to even not only feeling my feelings, but expressing them and getting support for them. And as I mentioned, I grew up in the suburbs, but I was a brown girl in very white suburbs. Even though I grew up in the Bay Area, which is pretty diverse, I was in a very white insular community. And so I was navigating racism as well as Eurocentric beauty ideals, right? Not only sort of shifting to what were my community members like to me, but also just the wider ecosystem, right? We are a product sometimes of our environments, and zooming further out, right, it's Eurocentric beauty ideals that date back to colonialism. And I think this is also very common now, but my academic environment was very competitive. People were often talking about their GPAs, and I think now with social media, it's even more amplified, where people are, showing all of their college admissions and things like that. But I felt that even in the 90s. And so, without access to really expressing my feelings in the way that maybe I would now, what I look back at now is seeing the different phases that I was going through, or eras, as me trying to find myself and trying to see where I fit in. And so, on the far, my right, I think your left, I was going through my preppy phase where I was like, well, if I try really hard to assimilate and to fit in, then I will find that I fit in and that I'm accepted. And that didn't really work. So then I was like, I'm gonna be punk. I'm gonna be really loudly different, and I'm gonna listen to aggressive music to channel how I feel. And then after some time, I was really into hip hop, and Tupac Shakur, who I have a pin of on right now. And so again, I was channeling that. And I think on one hand, you could say, okay, teenagers experiment, they're trying to find themselves. And I think that's true, but I think looking back, it's also me trying to see where I fit in. If I don't fit in this box, let's try these other boxes and see which one might suit me. One thing that was really special is that I did find a poetry collection at the time. I didn't really grow up reading a lot. I didn't see myself represented in books, and I happened to be at the mall one day, and I went to Barnes & Noble's, and I found this poetry collection. It's a small hardcover book. It is a poetry collection that is the music and poetry of Tupac Shakur. And the way that the collection is organized is on the left side, there's the handwritten archives of his work, the poetry on journal paper, and then on the right side, the poem has been transcribed, it's nicely typed. And this was like revolutionary for me. I had never seen a book so beautiful that not only included things like a journaling paper, which I had at home, right, that I would write notes to. I was a big note sender in class when I was getting in trouble. But it also showed someone writing in a way that felt accessible to me And that sounded like me, or how I emulated my speech at that time, especially because I was a child of the internet, the early internet, where it's hard to see from our vantage point, but he writes some of his poems with the letter 2, for example. Instead of T-O, he would say 2 with a number. And that was validating because I wrote the letters or numbers too when I would use my instant messenger. And suddenly I think there was a small green light that said, maybe you don't have to sound exactly like Shakespeare to write a book. And so I think I tucked that away. And then I started to make my own poetry books. And so I would use my incredible graphic design skills and use Microsoft templates to make these little collections that I'd staple. And because I was a fan of rapping, all of my poems rhymed. And I didn't know that there's other structures of poetry, but I tried that for a long time and I really liked it, and it connected with me, but at the same time it felt a little bit constraining because of my rules, my self-imposed rules of everything having to rhyme. But even when I look back at this poem, I see a lot of the very real emotions that I'm trying to deal with. In the first 2 lines, it says, "I hate this pain, I can feel it crawling in every vein," right? It's very, very, very real, raw emotion. And I think part of when I was writing this book, that was really surprising to me as I combed through my own archives, not only my old poetry books, but also my own diaries, was accessing how real and deep and painful a lot of those memories were. I think sometimes as we distance ourselves from life events, it's hard to access how hard different moments were in our life, especially for young people. But I think that was one of my biggest surprises as I was writing this book was, wow, I was really hurting. I was in a lot of pain, and I was trying to express myself and express these feelings and move them, I think, out of my body. And this is how I started to try to do that. So I'm going to read a short excerpt from my collection. All you need to know is that this collection, if you know it for Flaca, is something that moves from the time that I was about 5 years old to when I was 29 when I wrote it. The essays are chronological, as chronological as possible. And as a way to honor my voice, that voice that was really shaky growing up, I have tried to adopt the voice of myself at those ages as much as possible. So if you read the collection, you'll notice perhaps that in the beginning, the voice is a little younger. I'm a 5-year-old excited by the world. I go through sort of this depressive stage, and the voice changes as the collection progresses with my age. I also, as I mentioned, love music. And so one of the other things that I've done with this collection is instead of just chapters, I have a track list. And there's actually a Spotify playlist you can listen to. But each of the essays is titled after a song. So that's another accompaniment to it. And I'm just going to read a little bit of the beginning of chapter 6, which is called Keep Your Head Up. I don't remember when I stopped praying to God to make me white. I had stopped lacing my fingers at the side of my bed nightly, hoping I'd wake up with blue eyes and blonde hair long before I stopped the whisper praying to God in my head for the same want. For a while, I tried coating strands of my hair in lime juice and scrubbing my knees with lime halves until they were rubbed raw, like how Rosa from Aguililla taught me. I believed her when they said they would make me lighter, even though Rosa's hair and eyes and skin were still darker than mine. I figured it just took time and patience. I wanted to believe her, and I wanted to believe in God too. I thought he wouldn't mind if I used all natural ways to speed up the process, if I used the earth to make me look less like her. I just wanted to feel like I belonged. When I got to Newton Middle School in 6th grade, I was tired of trying to fit in. If I'm going to be treated differently by kids and parents and teachers, I might as well look and act differently. I'm not fooling anyone pretending I'm just like everyone else. My first experiment in being loudly different was going punk. I picked out a black Ramones t-shirt from Irvin's and a necklace made up of silver metal balls during back-to-school shopping with my mom. Hot Topic had the perfect cool belt, red pleather and silver studs. Macy's had a less punk selection, but I found a red DKNY tank top that had buildings and a sassy slit down the front. My mom wouldn't let me dye my hair red for picture day, so I poured on the Sun-In bleach in the bathroom. Erica had tried using Sun-In to get auburn hair, but it turned this orangey brown instead. She went to a real hairdresser after that. I figured the rest of the bottle and orange-colored hair was good enough for me. After I got my Ramones shirt, I downloaded their music from the internet with Napster. It took forever to download, like 2 hours, but I got a couple songs and listened to them on repeat. Beat on the Brat and I Want to Be Sedated were my favorite. I was kind of surprised punk wasn't as loud and as fast as I thought it was supposed to be. I wanted things I could shout with when I wanted to scream, which was often. I found some other punk music that was louder and faster and angrier, just like me. I changed my AIM screen name to Linkin Park 41, dedicated 50% to Linkin Park and 50% to Sum 41. Avril Lavigne was also really cool, so I bought her CD. I loved listening to her slow, shouty songs, not the ones on the radio, and I'd blast them from my red, bubble-shaped boombox when I took showers. I thought it was cool to call these pain-laced screaming tracks underground because they weren't on the radio, even though they were on a major record label. I always wanted to be the one in the know, discovering tracks before they were on MTV's TRL or better yet, BET's 106 & Park. There weren't very many punk kids at Newton, but the ones I did see didn't look like me and weren't cool with me. I thought I had totally convinced my Latina friend Monique to go punk with me because she said yes, but then she chickened out before picture day. She was such a poser. I, on the other hand, begged my mom to pay extra so I could get that red background for picture day. I looked very punk. And y'all are familiar with that photo. There I am again. I liked punk music and the fashion, but there weren't enough punk kids I could actually hang out with. I didn't want to be a poser hanging out with only preppy kids, so I slowly stopped being punk. My mom was hella mad because I asked her to spend $50 on a black Dickies jacket and stop being punk a week later. I felt kind of guilty, but when I was preppy again for a while, I just couldn't wear stuff like that anymore. I don't know why she didn't get that. Not long after, I began experimenting with being a chola. It came easy. I already had a lot of red clothing from being punk. Rap, R&B, and oldies were in rotation on the soundtrack of my upbringing, along with the Spanish language cumbias, pop, and even rock. My mom was even a homegirl back in the day, rocking pachuca feathered hair and pachuca style. My Uncle Baby still talked like a cholo too. Being a chola was my birthright. It was in my blood. I changed my AIM screen name to Ghetto Mexican 650 and made an AOL this time to match. I was gonna be chola forever. Although Belmont was hella white, Newton Middle School, unlike Garibaldi Elementary School, had black and brown kids who looked like me. Most of them came on buses from East Palo Alto and Redwood Shores, but I learned that a few of them lived in Belmont too, just on the other side. For the first time in my life, there were other people I could hang out with, like me, people who weren't white and who also didn't quite fit in because of the color of their skin. Being a chola started out fun. I felt beautiful and badass with gel-slicked hair, hard against my forehead, curls nice and crunchy, looking permanently wet with extra firm hairspray. With my baby fat jeans and straight-laced chucks, I felt strong too. People were suddenly even more scared to talk shit to me. I talk back to teachers now too. I became a pro at shooting people dirty looks to make them feel disgusting. I loved rolling my eyes all dramatic right in front of people's faces. I had new friends who other people were afraid of too. I don't know what happened first, being chola or being bad at school, but it seemed like it all happened at once. I hadn't loved school since first grade, but I started to hate school. All teachers cared about was telling us what to do. They made us do dumbass projects I didn't care about. Everything sucked. Why should I care about ancient Rome or the layers of the earth? Why should I have to read dusty, boring textbooks or The Hobbit, some garbage make-believe book about hairy little men with weird feet? Nothing at school was interesting to me. It all felt fake. Nothing like what real people like me dealt with every day. I didn't have anything in common with people from Mesopotamia. Plus, so many preppy kids talked about having crazy good GPAs like 3.8s and 4.0s. I had to try pretty hard to get a 3.2 GPA. I couldn't even imagine how I'd ever get much higher than that. But it seemed so easy for my rich preppy friends, and I felt like an idiot. Why should I even keep trying if I'd never be that smart? When parent-teacher conferences rolled around at the end of the first trimester, the results were a slap in the face to my mom. I had always done okay in school, B's mostly, but she found out I barely had a 2.0 with mostly C's and D's. She cried in front of my teachers as they told her how bad I was doing, how bad I was. I'd only seen her cry once before in front of me, after that phone call when we learned my dad was leaving our family for Gummy and their new family. And here she was, crying in front of me and strangers. I just sat there while they talked about me in front of me like I was invisible. I was mad my mom was crying. I told her D's were technically passing grades. I lied that I'd try to do better. Pretty soon, I felt like I was always in trouble at school and always in a fight with someone. At home, my sister Erica and my mom were always fighting with me. Hector was annoying and just sat around playing video games too. My mom said I had an attitude problem. It was her favorite thing to say. I also supposedly had anger problems. My dad only seemed to want to talk to me when my mom told him that I was in trouble. He only ever called me to yell at me. Never called to ask how I was doing or made an effort to go to my soccer games. Things with my dad, or anyone for that matter, weren't very good. I'm gonna pause there. And I know that's a heavy, heavy place to land and pause, but I want us to just sit with the moment for really where I was at and what I was feeling at that time in my life. Even though I had loved poetry, and even though I was starting to channel some of my emotions, that wasn't just sort of the key to unlocking me getting better or getting support, right? I still continued to struggle. I did start to find other forms of writing, and I thought that maybe this could be some sort of path for continued expression. I channeled a lot of my interests into this journalism class that I took in 7th grade. And I wrote really, really riveting columns like Hot or Not, in which I ranked things that were hot and not. So hot Cheetos, obviously hot. The color red, hot. Salsa, hot. There's also other things, like Tupac. Things that were not were apparently posers, and a lot of other things that I think I don't agree with now, but is how I felt at the time. And I also wrote this long, long piece on the life of Tupac Shakur. I'm trying to point it out. The life of Tupac Amaru Shakur. And I remember being so excited. Not only did I get to write some gossipy column stuff, but I got to write some real journalism. And I got to tell people all about Tupac and why he was so important to me in my life. And I used all my sources and was so excited for the day when I would have my big feature. They would hand out the newspapers in class. It was really cool, and it was like nice newsprint. And so we'd unfold them, look around, find our stuff. But that day, I remember being so excited and then sort of noticing snickering, and some folks were wondering why mine said, it's hard to see up here, but mine said paraphrased by Emilly Prado. And every other piece said by the person's name. And I asked my journalism teacher, I was like, hey, what does this mean? I've never seen this word. And he said, oh, it just means that you summarize something else. And I was like, but I used this, these different resources, and I pulled different quotes, and I thought that's how you write an article. You pull from different things. And he said, yeah, but I can tell that you didn't really write this. And I said, well, what do you mean? I wrote it, and I told you. And he said, yeah, but you're making it sound like someone else did. And he kind of brushed it off. And at that time, I was really trying to find my voice, and I did have a knack for sort of reading things and trying to, I would sound very professional, and adopt different voices depending on the context. So in my friends writing to each other, right, I do slang. I was code switching. I would do formal writing in this journalism setting. And when I didn't know a word, I would look it up, and then I'd understand the word and be like, oh great, I can use this in my article. But it was lost on my teacher, it was lost on people around me, and the impact of that really felt like this isn't a place for me. I am not going to be believed. I'm not going to be treated as the same as other writers. And even if it was an honest mistake, perhaps, it didn't feel like that to me. And I took that as a message that you're not supposed to write. And so I wish that this could have been a moment, I think, in my life where I could have found this as a career path, perhaps, or even just an interest, but that door felt closed to me at that time. And so this is me by the time in 8th grade, in my chola phase. One thing that happened at this age that really did stick with writing was that my sister, even though we didn't have a great relationship, she gave me this diary when I was in 8th grade. And at first I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with a diary. But she just said, I don't know, my therapist told me about diaries and I like writing in mine and you should try it too. And so I tried it and I loved it. Suddenly in my diary, I could write about whoever I wanted, however I wanted, and no one could stop me. It was very powerful. I would experiment with sort of getting out my anger, and sometimes I actually started to go to the page when I was upset. I didn't even know why I was upset, but I'd just be like, okay, I'm going to start writing. And I would find that as I would write, I would actually be able to slow down enough to kind of pinpoint what had caused the reason that I had been upset. And so I started to really process. I not only, again, experimented with my voice as I was doing before, but I really found that I would come away from writing in my diary often feeling a lot lighter. It was this transformative thing for me. It's not for everybody, but for me at that age, I could come to the diary, write out my feelings, and by the end of it, I'd know what they were, and they would be sort of transferred off of me and onto the page. And that was life-changing. And I started to then use the diary as a space to not only process internally, but then later I would write letters to people. When I couldn't speak for myself, I realized that I could write them in a letter form, and I could hand it to my dad, I could hand it to my mom, or I could use it to advocate for myself in school when my voice still, right, my speaking voice still at that time hadn't caught up with being able to advocate for myself. But writing really was a tool that I could use to at least be listened to in a way before that I never had been. And unfortunately, I continued to struggle in high school. I didn't just get better from there. But eventually, I did find some footing. I moved to a lot of different alternative high school programs until I found a program that really worked for me, where I was at a community college instead of high school, which was so shocking to me because having had, years and years and years of like bad grades and being told I was a bad student, but suddenly being in a community college setting, it was actually the autonomy, I think, of picking my own schedule and my subjects that allowed me to do super well. And so even though I started to do well finally, like outside of this sort of hyper-social competitive setting, I still was under the narrative that I was a bad student. So I still only applied to one school. I'm grateful for Portland State and having gone there. I think it was still really important to my journey, but I still hadn't shaken that I was maybe not this bad student who others would see as only bad forever. But by 2012, I ended up graduating from Portland State. So I moved from my high school, after high school, to Portland at 18. I had about 2 years of community college, and I was able to finish my college career pretty early because I had had some of those credits coming in, and I decided to channel my love of teaching later. I realized how important teachers could be if you had good teachers, because I had some good ones along the way. And I thought, oh, it would be really nice to do that for someone else and maybe be the teacher that I didn't get to experience as a kid. And even in this happy photo, this is me and my grandma, I can actually look back in this picture and see that my eyes are really weary and tired. And what was actually going on behind the scenes was that I graduated, but I felt really lost. I didn't have a career path after all. I decided about a few weeks before graduation that I couldn't be a full-time teacher because I had seen a lot of the full-time teachers that I was working with in my program be completely burnt out. And knowing that I am someone who kind of throws myself completely into something, I decided I couldn't do that because I would do the same, which in retrospect is still a cycle I do just in different career paths. So that's another thing I need to work on. But at that time, I thought, oh no, I just had studied all these years. I really tried to turn it around, and now what for? I was told that you go to college, you start your career, and it's all lined up, and suddenly my plan felt like it was breaking. I also had been dating someone from high school. We moved here. We were dating through college, and we broke up 3 weeks before my graduation. So I was really heartbroken, too, for the first time, my first sort of major life heartbreak. And I was also unemployed, which led to, at first I thought it would be really fun, but then it led to financial stress and to having too much time, honestly, between the time that I finished my program and the time that I was actually doing my graduation ceremony. That was 3 months where I was just sort of flailing. On the up hand, I did find a therapist that I liked, but by the time that I was actually days away from my graduation, all of the things, it felt like I'd been trying to balance all of these stressors, they just broke me. And I ended up self-admitting to a psychiatric hospital, and I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I didn't know if I was going to make it out in time or get stable enough to attend graduation, but I just knew I did not feel like myself. I was scaring myself, and I had to figure out how I could get some help before. And that was a really hard decision, coming from a family that didn't talk about feelings. My own mother was kind of like, maybe you just get some sleep, but I had had some advice from other friends and parents at that time, and the decision that sort of helped me go there was, if you don't need help, they'll turn you away. And if you do, then you'll get the help, and that's what you're looking for, maybe. Luckily, I did make it out the night before, and I was stable-ish enough. I was shaky, but I was stable enough to walk across that stage because it was so important to me and my family. But it was sort of this cycle of like, okay, here's another beginning. I've hit rock bottom. I thought being a bad student and all this sort of this life of like struggling, I was coming out of it, right? But I was back at what felt like ground floor, even worse than I could have imagined. But in actually my psychosis, I realized that I wanted to be a writer. And it took me a while after stabilizing to really listen to myself and what had happened to me at that moment and think, is this true or was this me being crazy? And I eventually learned to trust myself and try to find that path. And that's really when I decided I wanted to be a writer, was in that moment. I think when everything felt like hopeless, that was the thing where I was like, let's try this path and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't, but at least I'll have tried. And so in order to be a writer, I had to take care of myself and learn how to do that. And so eventually I started an internship at Bitch Media. I had a lot of fears coming into it. I said, what if I fail? I'm not a real writer. I didn't study writing, right? I've just studied education this whole time. Who am I to be a writer? I'm not smart. I'm writing with all these people who are really smart and famous. All of these fears. And I just had to just try to put one foot in front of my other and try to write the things and try to learn and try to show up even though I was still afraid. My first published article that was a feature was about the Bolivian labor rights activist, Emilly de Chungara. And that was really exciting for me to get to, at that time, I think add some diversity to an institution that was pretty homogenous and white, although later in Bitch Media's trajectory, they ended up starting to hire a lot of people of color. But at that time, they had this whole series where they had not yet featured a woman of color, and so I was really excited to get to do that. And I ended up, over the next 5 or so years, eventually trying to go freelance, trying to do journalism full time. Met some people in this room at that time in my life when I was just trying to get to know everyone in my community. And I still tried to channel that same interest that I had at Bitch Media, which was let me use the power that I have to amplify folks whose maybe stories aren't told as often. And so whether that was people of color, queer people, youth, there's this protest here that took place in Texas my goal was always to try to amplify the stories that were being pushed to the margins, and I saw that as sort of my niche or my beat. Sometimes journalists are like, I'm a sports journalist. I just said I'd try to write about everything, but I want to amplify the voice of people from historically marginalized communities. And I had some more ups and downs. I ended up doing a lot of writing classes too after that point, even though I didn't study writing initially. I learned a lot from my community, not only in person in Portland, but also online. Community support was integral. A lot of times my community members would help fundraise to get me to a writing class, or I would, I don't know, ask for help with finding a job, and people would help me so that I could pursue this writing. And I also was on another career path where I was like, I'm gonna be a librarian, and I got a scholarship and it was going well, and then my writing started to take off and I said, I'm gonna pump the brakes on this. And I can always return to being a librarian or doing that school program, but I wasn't ready yet to give up on writing. And so I don't see it as a failure. I think that's just part of life, right? Is like seeing what's in front of you and deciding which path and making decisions. But eventually I enrolled in a program for 9 months called the Prose Portfolio Program, Pro Certificate then, but now it's the Portfolio Program. And I made a little zine called Funeral for Flaca. And that was the culmination of 9 months of work. And I had some music themed in it. I had a track insert that I created to mimic what you would find in a tape deck. And I was really proud of that zine. And I decided to treat it like a real book. And I sent out press releases, and I had a party, and OPB covered it, and I was so excited that they would cover my chapbook. But I wanted to celebrate this because I had been loving writing forever, and it felt really cool to just put out something that I made entirely. It's a little crooked because I even cut the paper, I glued it, I did every step of it. And so I felt really excited that they also thought it was exciting. And I continued to make zines, so a lot of them are not as this big. A lot of them are just, maybe 20 pages of paper folded and stapled in half, but I get to write about things like the history of non-binary and women, Black, Indigenous people of color at the advent of punk rock. So that's a zine that I make, and I get to do that for fun. I also co-wrote a zine recently called American Us, and that was a project that began with a poet who was incarcerated at the time, and then through the duration of the project actually got reintegrated to our community. And we have a lot of mirroring experiences, although different, of experiences with migration and institutions. And that was a really amazing project I got to do. Along the way, I also wrote another book called Examining Assimilation, which was a very slim book that you might find in a children's library. And I think the cover makes it look like it came out in 1982, but it came out in 2019. And that just happens when you work with small presses and they have their control over the creative vision for it. But I got to, again, channel my love of writing in a way that is still teaching perhaps, or sharing my love of writing, but in a different way than I ever thought. And in July of 2021, Funeral for Flaca came out with a local press. It's about twice as long as the original version. I submitted it to the local publication, Future Tense Books, and they were excited to publish it. I had to add more essays. I got to the chance to kind of revisit it, and I learned a lot of the original essays were out of order. As I mentioned earlier, time can be tricky. But it was a really special opportunity. And another thing too is that we added a lot of photos. And one of the photos here is of my grandma and my mom. It's one of 2 pictures we have of them when my mom was a child in Mexico, because they immigrated really suddenly. They don't have a lot of pictures. And so I'm really honored to get to not only write and share my stories, but to get to add to the archive something that otherwise could have been lost, or at least for this time, it exists in all these little books, this photo that we found during the writing process. And I'm now, you heard in the beginning, a part-time faculty member at PNCA. I graduated. I eventually did give myself the gift of studying creative writing. Even though my book was coming out, I really wanted to be in that environment. And so June of 2021, right before my book came out, I enrolled at Randolph College That's a photo of me and some of my friends at college at my MFA. I graduated last June, and it was an amazing, enriching process, and it really just felt, again, like a gift to myself to get to finally study writing intensely, as I always have wanted to do. And I wear a lot of hats. I'm still an educator, just in a different capacity than I imagined. I'm a writer, a DJ, a Thea, a community organizer, a friend, a dog mom, and I'm honored to do all this work. And what I'm working on now is finishing the memoir that I started in 2012 when I really needed a book by a Chicana with mental illness, with bipolar disorder, because I didn't have that. And now there's like maybe a couple that have come out since, but there's still not enough. And so I'm working on finishing that book that I promised myself that I would write because I really needed that at that time. So in summary, this is how my life has felt, not only from 2012 at that moment when I hit rock bottom, but I think actually before that. And it's wild. I still have the same questions and fears. They're a little different now. What if my aunts get mad when I write this book again? What if no one will publish my next book, right? What if everyone forgets about me? The publishing cycle is so rapid. What if my work isn't relevant anymore? And I not only am telling myself, it's okay, I got it, but actually we got it. I lean on community now too. It's not all on me to lift myself up, right? And so why do I write? I write for little Emily. I write for Emily, who did not feel strong, smart, didn't feel like she had a voice. I write for anyone who's felt invisible, anyone who's felt marginalized or pushed to the side, like they weren't worthy. Because we are, I was, I am, we are. So thank you for listening. And I think we're gonna open it up for questions. Do you need this mics and stuff?
Oh, yeah. And channel 7.
Yes, channel 7. Yeah, so I'd love to hear from folks if you have questions. And you know, we're a smaller group, so we have opportunity to be more intimate. And I'm gonna actually sit closer, so I'm gonna sit right here.
So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Sienna will be coming around with the mic. So, yeah. Do we have any questions in the audience?
It can be about the book, writing, anything you're thinking, whatever. But I would love to hear from y'all.
I'm just curious. You said you grew up in San Francisco, and then you decided to go to PSU. What made you want to go to PSU specifically?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to leave home. I knew I wanted to go somewhere else, and I thought about maybe the East Coast. I really liked New York City, thought that could be cool. I had only seen it in movies. But partly was the person I was dating was moving to Oregon, and part of it also when I visited Portland, I just felt like there was a lot of like arts and culture happening. I liked that the school was in the city proper and it wasn't like on a campus. I actually liked feeling like I was a part of something else than just college. I was really wanting to just kind of speed through college at that time, and so I really actually liked that you didn't have to live on campus and things like that. But I also think that part of it too was the music scene. At that time, I really liked indie music, and Portland and the Pacific Northwest was really popular for that. But yeah, I figured anywhere I could go, I could finish school, and I would rather do it with the person that I was dating at the time, and also in a place that was affordable and that felt open to sort of like alternative people in general. So I didn't realize how wide it was, but I also came from a very white community. So it took me a few years to like feel what it was like to not have like such a long, like a big network of people of color. And so eventually I did try to like make spaces and find spaces for people of color, but it was a while before I realized kind of the impact that that could have on my experience. Thank you.
Hi, Emily.
Hello.
I'm curious about your MFA experience, and so you started writing your memoir in 2012. Were you using that, so it's kind of two-part, were you using that as your MFA thesis? And if so, how did it change? Or if not, you know, what else were you, you know, writing about? And also, what did kind of learning formal writing, because there's lots of debates about MFA programs in general, you know, how did that change your kind of point of view on being a writer?
Yeah, thank you so much. Also great to see you. So yeah, I applied to the MFA with the sort of small amount of my memoir that I had written. For a long time, the part of my memoir that I had was a scene in the hospital, and it took me a really long time to go from 10 pages to eventually 20 to 30. It took a really long time. Later, I've learned through not only the MFA, but other experiences writing my other book that it's okay not to start at the heart of anything. So if anyone here is interested in writing something that's maybe traumatic, you can write everything else, because everything else will also have to be written, and you can do it in pieces. A lot of folks come into the MFA maybe with a specific idea for the thesis and it shifts, but actually for me, I did continue to work on that memoir. I also started other projects that I didn't anticipate, and I just knew that I wanted to write this book, but I think what has happened in the MFA is it really was like because I was in a very supportive community, I think it was good that I waited 10 years or more to do the program, because the MFA culture has shifted a lot in the time. When I originally wanted to get, not even my MFA, I just wanted to study writing, which I think now I know it's like the MFA usually. But before that, there weren't a lot of programs like Randolph. Randolph, where I went, started in 2019, I think. 17 maybe, so it's a very new program, but they were founded with the intention of being anti-racist and catering primarily to BIPOC folks and queer folks. So my experience was really different than some people's. I had a really amazing, supportive group of people who also are very genre fluid. We all would attend each other's seminars in poetry, prose, memoir, fiction. And so that, I think, has come through in the memoir now, where I'm experimenting with poetry. Actually, maybe I'm coming back to my roots. And I also just really sped up. You know, you have people who are like, okay, tell me what the ending of this book is. Okay, fine, I'll pick an ending. And that would have taken me, honestly, 3 years or something outside of it, right, to get the confidence, I think, to even just make that decision. And so I think support has been the biggest thing. The other thing, one of my goals of attending the MFA was to have the language to talk about my work. And interestingly, right, I have this book that came out before I did my MFA. Now I have a lot of language to describe how I wrote, what I wrote, and I knew that a lot of that was sort of inherent in me. But the difference is I now understand the language, and I can explain to you, oh, I write in fragments and there's some flash in there. Previously, I just said, I don't know, I was writing and, here's this. And so not only do I have the language, but I also have some of the tools, and that's what I wanted to be able to sort of not manufacture, but slow down and think about the mechanics of a piece and plan something out as opposed to only go through intuition. And I feel like I got that. Did that answer your question? I also started a novel in the MFA, so that's something that wasn't my thesis, but it was an unexpected opening for another project. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what you're teaching and also how teaching might inform what you might write in the future?
Yes, I love teaching. So at PNCA, I'm teaching in the MFA, which, like my program, actually is low residency, which means that the bulk of your studies are sort of done on a one-on-one mentorship model between a faculty member and a student. And as opposed to a traditional class where you're attending maybe 1, 2, 3 times a week, you only attend for a 10-day intensive at the beginning of each semester. And so I have 2 students through the MFA that I'm working with, so they basically send me their creative work, writing and critical analysis once a month. We have letter correspondence. In my program, we did Zooms, but we do letter correspondence in this program. And I get to really dive in and say, okay, you said you're wanting to write this kind of work, here's what I'm seeing, and we really just get to cater the program, and I'm trying to help my students sort of advocate for what they want out of the MFA. The low-res MFA is very different, where you really are in the driver's seat as far as like what your curriculum is. You need to be able to sort of pinpoint what you need help with and be open to that. And so that's what I work with those students on. One of my students is doing her thesis, so that's been really exciting to help just see her break apart kind of what she came in and play. That's something that I struggle with sometimes as a writer, is to get out of the rigidity. So to get to help someone else do that is very satisfying. And I'm also teaching a creative nonfiction class for the MA in critical studies, which has been also exciting because my background at Bitch Media, but also my undergrad, basically had a critical studies component as far as understanding systems of oppression and sort of that zoomed out lens, so it works really well. And outside of that, I teach a lot of professional development workshops. Sometimes I teach creative writing workshops with different community organizations. I think every time I teach, I learn something new for my own writing. I'm always thinking about my own writing and also how I can help students, but even conversations. Like I always think of teaching as an exchange. I'm constantly learning from the people in the spaces that I'm with, and hopefully vice versa. And I think that one of my favorite things to do, even though it's scary, is to propose topics that I'm like a little shaky with, and then I get really well acquainted because I have to teach it. And so that's a strategy that I've done before. Recently, actually, a class I taught was called Memoirist as Time Traveler, and it was about how tricky time can be. I keep talking about time, but you have the challenge that when you're writing a memoir to place yourself in a particular moment, and there can be multiple timelines happening. There can be the perspective of yourself now versus the perspective of the time you've frozen yourself in. And so there's a lot of complexity there that I feel like I'm more equipped to teach or to write now that I've taught it. But I'm still learning. Yeah.
So first off, thank you again for just sharing your story and sharing the power of writing, especially for, I think, students who come out in environments like this. I know for myself, just for the sake of the recording, since I think I'm out of camera shot, this is Bruce again, but I know it's really important for me. And kind of building off that last question, you know, I have to imagine like your experience as a student was very influential in how you teach and in reaching students like yourself who may not have, you know, who've fallen through the cracks in terms of like, you know, what people traditionally expect out of students or however you want to frame it. So do you have examples of like particular practices you use to, I guess, just make your teaching more accessible to all kinds of students? And it can be for any age. I know I had actually a LOHS classmate invited me to like a zine workshop you did back for like young students. So I know you do a variety of age ranges, but yeah, do you have examples of specific practices you use?
Oh yeah, there's so many. And yeah, part of actually how Bruce and I know each other is that we both teach in writers in the schools with literary arts, so we get the opportunities to go into high school classrooms, and that's been a really great way to kind of give myself that teaching that I always wanted to do, but in sort of short doses where it's all my whole life, but it is a really great opportunity to have sustained time in a classroom. And I think one of the most important things is just building trust. And so it can be a challenge in writers in the schools when you're sort of just being parachuted into a space, but trying to get to know your students, trying to talk to them. I think that if there's ever students who are like checked out or, you know, they have their head on their desk, always approaching it with like, are you doing okay? Can I help, you know, support you in any way? As opposed to thinking of them as being, I don't know, trying to like cause trouble. I think a lot of times teachers don't realize how much also is going on at home, right? I think other practices that I try, especially right now, actually at this, the high school and college level, I think what can be challenging is that people are coming in with so many different levels of experience. So you're trying to teach at a lot of different levels. And so that can be, making sure that there's always really clear instructions, that there's extra supports for people who want them, but they're optional. So one of the things that I start every writing class with, no matter what age range it is a free write. And so the rules of a free write are you just have to write from start to stop. I'll try to say no editing, whatever, but I have a variety of prompts, and I'll say you can use these prompts or you don't have to, but the point of this is actually to just get you to write. And so I think one of the practices I've been really trying to think about is what is the purpose of the activity and what are the different ways that someone might engage with the activity that aren't just perhaps writing an answer and submitting it. With my graduate level students, a lot of them are visual artists because they're at PNCA's program, and so that's been a new challenge where a lot of them don't have experience with maybe reading analytically in this creative writing world. And so I have adopted to allowing folks to draw images sometimes as a way to respond to something or to leave voice memos instead of writing, because although writing is important, I think about what is the actual takeaway here, and in that instance, when they're responding to readings, I really just want them to be prepared for a discussion. And so I actually don't need them to write an essay about it. So just always thinking about different ways to make my teaching accessible and varied and very flexible while also still having parameters, especially with high school kids, but all ages will kind of be like, what about this? And I'm like, well, there are some rules, so let's hold those because we're in a community, we have agreements, but outside of that, let's be flexible and have conversations about what feels fair and what doesn't and why, and it's all iterative, it's all flexible. And I think that's something I try to model for my teaching, and I hope that my students can model that too, that you don't have to be perfect, you just have to show up, and we'll continue to just work on it together.
I actually had a question.
Yeah.
What are ways that you would recommend that we together as a community can raise awareness to some of the hardships that students of color face in particular?
Yeah, I mean, not to plug my own book, but maybe read my book. I think that could be one way. I think the reason why I even mentioned my book is that obviously I'm here, but like I even mentioned in doing my own research, sometimes it's easy to forget how much is going on just in anyone's life, but especially in young people's lives. Young people face the bias of older folks thinking that they don't know enough or as much, or that they don't feel as much, or that their feelings aren't as valid. And I think that that's one of the first steps is just checking, I think, our biases and thinking about when are we actually listening or when are we thinking about other things that are informing the way we're interacting with someone. I think, again, it comes back to also trusting our students and trying to build trust and get them to trust us. And if students don't trust us, sometimes it's not personal. There's a lot of different people that I've interacted with our students, and that can really impact how trusting they are of adults. You might remind them of someone else, right? But I think the most important thing is to just try to keep trying and try to be empathetic. And again, if a question is raised of like, why is it this way? Really think about that. Does it have to be that way? What if it was a different way? Just listen, I think. That's the first thing. And I think there's so much more, right? There's these community talks that can be helpful. And if there are mistakes that are made, accountability is huge. Being able to tell a kid, especially a young person, I'm sorry that I did this, I made a mistake, that can be the first time they've heard an adult say that, but also a reminder that they're allowed to make mistakes, hopefully too, right? And that they also are owed mutual respect in that regard. So I think just trying to be really open and honest as much as possible and empathetic.
I was interested in the last comment you made, and I see that one, and I've seen that. I have worked with kids for a long time, lots of kids who probably struggled with some of the same things that you have, but can you remember other times when someone said something that empowered you or made you feel like, yes, I can? Because I'd like to hear what worked for you.
Yeah, so one instance was actually, there was a few people in my life, so a few adults specifically in my life where I felt like really, really seen in a way that a lot of other adults I didn't feel like it. One is a family, sort of like father figure, which I will not probably get into for this example, but I think this other person was actually someone that I saw because I wanted to get help, and I told my mom I wanted help sort of controlling my anger, that I would feel really angry sometimes, and that I just didn't know how to respond, and sometimes I didn't respond in the ways that I wanted to. And so she took me to an anger management class that she found, which now in retrospect, I'm like, but what is the root of the anger? Of course you can address the anger, and sort of calm that down, but I think there was more digging. But I think that it was a great first step, and I wish there was more. But in this class, I had a woman who led it, and she was very personable. She talked, like me and my friends. Like when I'm in a classroom too, like I try to relate. I will try to use my Gen Z and Gen Alpha slang if it's gonna make folks feel more comfortable. I'm gonna make jokes because I make jokes with my own friends, right? So I think what that allows is for that kind of wall and that power structure to fall back a little bit. And she did that. She was really funny. She would make us laugh. She would sometimes make fun of the curriculum when it was a little stale because it was inherited, so it allowed us to trust her. And she really listened. Like one of the things I think about anger management that was helpful from this particular woman was that it wasn't just like, you're doing something wrong, we're gonna fix you. It was like, how does it make you feel? What does it feel like this? Oh, I know for me it feels, like this in my body. Sometimes I say things I don't mean, or sometimes I wish this. And so I'm here to help you show up in the way that you want to, not because someone else is requiring you to or asking it, but because it's gonna help you and what you want in your life. And so I think she just did a really good job of actually listening to our feelings, sharing her feelings, being friendly, funny, and creating an environment where we also could share, right? And also the other folks in that space were other teenage girls like me, and I could be like, oh, it's really cool to hear that there's another person who struggles with this aspect of themselves and that they feel judged, or that, they feel like they're called a bully, or, these other things, and they felt like that. But I could also interact with them and see them as kind people, right? So I think that was really helpful.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So you've talked about just kind of like making your beat as a journalist, especially early on, sort of lifting up the stories of different marginalized communities and people. I see here in Lake Oswego and really throughout the county where that's still a need, both on an individual level, but then also just in terms of lack of media in general, competition. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole other story. But can you just talk about, I guess, some of the challenges in being able to do that? And I know this is a conversation we've had off of this space before, but yeah, just, what it really takes, not just doing these stories, but kind of pushing through and trying to make them sustainable, or telling these stories sustainable.
Yeah, I know we've talked about this a lot. I feel like in some ways, Bruce and I have grown together. We've known each other for, I don't know, at least 8 years or something at this point. And it's been amazing to see us both do our things and pivot away and towards and interweaving journalism and doing it in different ways, like with video, right, for Bruce. But I think one of the challenges has always been sustaining myself as a writer, just the culture of gig work and not having a full-time job. I wasn't a person who did the journalism route through undergrad or through graduate school. And so I had applied to jobs in newsrooms, but it was always a struggle. I think part of it's too not knowing the language that necessarily a newsroom journalist would use and the approaches that they're taught. I learned how to tell stories because I know how to write and I know how to talk to people, and that is effective for storytelling, but isn't necessarily up to what a journalism newsroom would require. And so I think what could have been helpful is if I maybe was in spaces where people could have helped mentor me or taken a chance on like developing me into that journalist. But I ended up continuing to try to do freelance journalism for about 5 years full time, like I mentioned. And the hardest thing was just making a living. You know, you have some news outlets that pay 10 cents a word if you actually track the time, which I did sometimes. And that's how I had to step away, was I would be like, I'm making $4 an hour. And if I ethically don't believe that people should be paid under $15 an hour, then why am I subjecting myself to this low payment? And it's been a struggle between wanting to really use platforms when I have them to amplify others' stories and voices, but ultimately also being like, I'm a person who doesn't come from generational wealth. I am trying to move beyond just like bare survival, and I'm trying to build a life for myself. And that means that now I do journalism, but I do it subjectively. I do it in small pockets, and I have all these different income streams and career paths that I'm doing at the same time, so that I have energy to write when I can write in this way and write well. One of the challenges of not having a lot of financial support for writing, and a lot of the reasons why we don't see a ton of immersive journalism anymore, is that stuff takes time. It takes time not only to get to know communities. I did a series in Ontario, Oregon, where I had to be on the ground. It's an 8-hour drive. I tried ahead of time to kind of email some people. Nobody responded. They're like, who's this random person? On the ground, I could make incredible connections, but I was there for a few different chunks of time, but ultimately ended up being like 2 weeks over a few visits. And that's not possible unless you're in those communities. And so one of the challenges of not having that funding is that further exacerbates rural stories being told, because we don't have people who are in those communities who are taking the time to not only go there, but then also the writing that I like to do is some of the stuff that looks at systems, right? I think about the macro to micro. I think about, not only this girl struggling with depression, but what is the family unit, right? Our family history of trauma and the context of our community, and then the wider lens of like colonization, right? In order to be able to slow down and zoom in and out to understand and tell the story of why there's a person living on Social Security who's struggling to make it, who's a senior in Ontario, Oregon, I need to be able to step back and say, how did we get here? That takes a lot of time, and a $200 paycheck for an article isn't enough to do that. And so I think one of the things, again, continues to just be like, how can we invest and take the time to make sure that we're telling quality stories, that people have access to those stories. I know that, paywalls become an option perhaps, but then that's sort of going against what the role of journalism is, to inform people, right? So if that model isn't working, then what are other ways that we can make sure that media is allowed to exist? Also, I just want to note that on the Response to Racism website, there was a blog post recently, a cultural criticism that I think a high school student wrote that was amazing about RuPaul's Drag Race. And so I just want to applaud whoever wrote that in your community for not only hopefully having the access to get a small stipend for that work, but that's important writing that we need to see. And Bitch Media, where I wrote, doesn't exist anymore because it struggled to find financing. So even if it is a blog, like, we need to support, if not fiscally, but at least with sharing those stories that we see are meaningful and telling people about them so that other people can pay attention.
Two things. Well, first, thank you for sharing your personal story, because I don't know how you did it, but and if you said this already, I apologize because I might have spaced out, but one, what's the meaning behind the title of your book? And two, without going down too big of a rabbit hole, your thoughts on the mental health system in general.
Excellent questions, and you did not miss that. I forgot to mention it. After all these years, I still try to remind myself. I talk about the context and the structure, but I always forget to talk about the title. Sometimes I read from the essay where you'll learn about that. That's, I think, essay like 11. But Flaca is a nickname that my dad gave me, and my whole family called me Flaca growing up. Flaca means skinny girl, and because my book talks about not only my experience with like racism, but my relationship with my dad and my body image, and eventually had disordered eating and mental illness, when I was thinking about a title for this collection, Funeral for Flaca came to mind because I was thinking about rebirth. And I was thinking about, I wrote this, the essay that actually was that title, and then the title got changed when they all became song titles. But that essay was called Funeral for Flaca because in it I started to write, and then I imagined a scene of having a funeral for my name of Flaca, and so I'm like laying a bunch of things to rest that symbolize change. And part of it was because my father and my family stopped calling me Flaca at a certain stage, and it was because my body changed. And that was really hard to grapple with because not only was it like this, you know, sort of token that I was given and it was taken away, but also as someone who struggled with body image to be like, oh, I guess I no longer embody this name, right? And so I don't deserve this name. That was really painful. And so instead of, I don't know, holding on to just how painful that was, I decided to have a funeral for it in my book. And I think about sometimes when we let things die, right? When things burn, for example, in the natural world, the remains mix in with the dirt and the soil, and it enriches the soil so that other things can grow. And I thought about that as being this moment for me to let Flaca lay to rest and to see what comes next. And in a lot of ways, this book is chronicling the struggle towards trying to figure out healing, which I think is a good segue into this other part of the question. When I wrote this book, I still was trying to figure out what does it look like to heal. I'm not really convinced I know what that is or what that would look like or that it's this fixed state, but I'm gonna still try to keep on heading that way. Because then that's been 3 years since this was published almost. And my experience was very troubling in the psychiatric hospital. I learned a lot more later about how it works, which I think is a testament to like how disorienting it is to be in that environment, because I didn't know what happens when you self-admit. I didn't know that the goal of when you self-admit or are admitted to those facilities is to stabilize. And that's typically done through initially giving you a lot of medication to sort of help your system come back to whatever zero is. If you are coming in on drugs or something, they're trying to like give you space to just get that out of your system. So the first days are very disorienting on purpose in a way. And then there might be some orientation. But I was so confused in that space. There was all these people I was talking to. There was, you know, psychiatrists and social workers and the doctor, and I didn't know who was what, and I just felt really unsteady the whole time. And there was a lot of language mirroring incarceration, where people would say, oh, you don't want to become a repeat offender. Oh, you know, it's really up to you to find balance. And there's a lot of shame. There was things I had questions about where I'm like, what does it mean to be promiscuous? I'm 20. Is this promiscuous, or is this risky behavior, or is this just behavior? Like, how do I actually know? And there was a lot of familiar senses of being in a space where I didn't feel listened to. And my fellow patients, we also felt like we were less likely to be listened to because we were struggling with mental illness. You know, we'd say, oh, they just think we're crazy, which we thought was funny because we'd be like, we are. But it was a really community bonding experience with those people, but also not really a place for true healing. And I had diagnoses, my bipolar diagnosis, but I also later, when I was writing my memoir, I noticed that my record had said that I was exhibiting symptoms of PTSD, which later I was diagnosed with. I talk about that in this book, with CPTSD. But my therapist after that, my psychiatrist, no one ever followed up on those symptoms. So because I think I didn't really fit the profile, there's a lot of associations with PTSD. Often we're thinking of like the war vet and that only, even though there's a lot of people who have PTSD. There were things that were missed. So I think that the institutional experience was very cold. It was very dehumanizing. And it got me what I needed as far as being stable enough, but it really felt like, it's felt like I've been on my own sometimes, where the medical system in general, you have these specialists for all these different parts of your body. Everything is separated, and there's not really one person that brings it all together. Maybe that's supposed to be your primary care physician, but you have a 15-minute appointment with them once a year, if you're lucky. A lot of our system is very individual and separated, and it really feels like it's up to us to figure out and to advocate and to try to put all the pieces. Like, I've been having some chronic pain, and I'm like, okay, I've done the PT, I've been doing the acupuncture, I'm taking the magnesium, okay, and I'm working on my stress. What is it, And they're all separate. And so I think that's continued to be my experience, where I'm trying to find my way through. I think that there's a lot of improvements. I think that there's also a lot of class disparities that I especially witness in the psychiatric hospital, where you're offered either a prescription or a 1-month supply of your medication upon discharge. Just things like that I think were really hard to witness. And I don't know, I got a firsthand look into why our system is the way it is. And so my feelings aren't super great, but I have had a really nice therapist in recent years. And I'm trying to figure out, how do I write this book that is about me, but it's also about this institution, that's also about family. It's also, there's so many layers to it, and it's hard to write. But the final thing I'll just say too, as I mentioned earlier, I'm experimenting with poetry, and part of it is the practice of erasure, where you might take a source document, like say, a lot of it happened with when Trump was elected. A lot of people would do it with his speeches, and then they would maybe pull it apart to amplify certain parts of it. And it's sort of like it's like a exchange of power, where I have the power to black out certain parts of this document. And I'm experimenting with things like that for my collection of what does it look like if I redact or manipulate the hospital record, which has become my narrative of how I was at that point. What does it look like if I try to interject my own perspectives? Yeah, thanks. Sorry, that was a long answer. I'm very passionate about both of those questions.
Emily, we have a question online. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The question is, in this current political environment, are there encouraging ways that you have seen communities organize for positive change, in ways people are coming together across different ideologies?
I think that, it's such a broad question that I have seen people do a lot of amazing things. I think that when we talk about people coming together, I have questions. Is it we're having a conversation, or is it that we're rallying to advocate for something? I think in order to advocate, you have to have a shared ideology of some sort in order to come together, even if it isn't your entire political affiliation. Maybe it's that we both agree that mental health institutions need to be better, and that can be common ground. So I think that in order to have spaces where maybe there's a lot of different perspectives, it's finding those places where we have things in common or can empathize. So I hope that's kind of answering the question. I don't fully know how to answer it because it's so general, but I've seen a lot of amazing activism in all sorts of communities, whether it's students of different groups coming together to collectively have a sit-in, for example. That's a story I wrote about once for Roseville High School. It's just figuring out where are the commonalities that we can come together around. Any other questions? There's no bad questions. Yes? And I don't know how we're doing on time, Bruce, as well, so we still have a little time. So.
I also wanted to thank you for the absolute gift of getting to hear your story. And I have, since you've woven music, I have a playlist question. I just wanted to honor that part of this beautiful presentation. I'm just so full of respect for your resilience. That's what was really hitting my heart tonight, among other things, but that was really here. And I was curious what your playlist now is when you need to tap into your resilience on a difficult day.
That's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, music was always a place where I really felt seen and heard. I felt like I could listen to whatever artist I was into at the time and find the songs that were expressing, you know, whether it was hurt or loss or like deep aching love. I used to listen to so many songs about love and just like cry and be like, love is so hard. Now I probably would turn to something nostalgic. It depends. I'm very much like, it depends on the mood. I have genres, so many genres that I listen to and play as a DJ. I have also done a practice of sometimes if I'm in a particularly hard moment, I'll create a playlist for that moment in order to try to channel my feelings. So I'll create like a narrative of my experience at that time. So actually in an election, to bring it up again, but that 20 whatever election that, I don't know, 17? 18, 16. Anyways, it's confusing because it's the year before. Anyways, I made a playlist and one song that actually ends up appearing on here because it's comforting to me is called Mad by Solange Knowles. And it's just about that you have the right to be mad and it's okay to like let it out. And she has such a beautiful voice and it's so comforting to maybe not do the anger management thing of like, anger is bad, but like, why is the anger there? It's okay to feel it. It's telling you something. It's a signal, right? And so I like that it is celebrating this part that I resisted for a long time of myself, but that is just another part of the many emotions that we're allowed to have. So yeah, Mad by Solange Knowles.
Emily, I was wondering, have you gone back to your high school or your middle school and shared any of your writing?
I haven't. They haven't asked me back. I think they're afraid of me. No, I'm just kidding. No, I haven't. Although I did get a message from one of my old teachers from the alternative high school / community college program that they had shared the work, and then a student from that program emailed me, and that was really cool because she was like, I'm a Latina, I grew up in this town and I'm going to your same school and it's the same. And I was like, oh no. But I thought how cool that she has this book and that she's reaching out, and I got to be like, that's amazing. Let me know if you have any questions, you know? So even if I'm like a friend from afar, it was nice to have this connection. But yeah, I guess if Carlmont High School or Ralston Middle School, those are the real names, if they ever would want me to come back, I would, although I definitely still have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. And so it would be interesting to try to figure out how do I come into that space and maybe share this story, but in that particular context. And I know that none of those teachers, most of them are not really there. So, but I'd still want to authentically speak to my experience at that place. So I don't know. I would be happy to figure out how to do it with authenticity.
Okay, can we get another round of applause for Emilly Prado?
Thank you.
So for all those in attendance, Emilly will be doing a book signing outside in the fellowship hall. So if you haven't gotten a copy already, please do get it signed. And I just want to add, because you shout out the blog post by Cameron Izuka, it's called RuPaul's Drag Race and the Never-Ending Constipation of Cultural Appropriation.
It's so good. It's so good. Read it.
And I just wanted to your point, Cameron is a former Lake Oswego High School graduate, former student columnist for Respond to Racism, who, thanks to your support, we were able to hire as a contract writer. Yeah. So the other part with, if you'd like to support and make sure we can expand that, again, please go to respondtoracism.org, donate. You can also, for a suggested donation of $15, get your book signed by Emily, again, around the corner in the fellowship hall. So please do support the work. And yeah, thank you again for coming out tonight.
Thank you all for having me. If you have any questions you want to ask that I didn't want to ask out loud, I'll be over there too. Thank you.